Right on. Good morning, everybody. So I arrived here dressed like this and became very insecure that I was not wearing a suit and tie, and so I dove into my photo archives to try to find the last time I was wearing a suit. And this was the photo I found. So my name is Eaves, and I'm the director of the Code for America Institute. And the reason I'm here is I kind of want to talk to you a little bit about what Code for America is and what we're trying to do. And the main kind of crux around all of this is that the experience that consumers have is very, very different than what the experience citizens have. So consumers are increasingly becoming kind of expecting that this is going to be the type of experience they have when they want to go and buy something, and yet they feel like when they go and engage with government, this is a lot more of the type of experience that they run into. And I think we can all acknowledge that this is actually a deeply problematic experience, both from a democratic engagement perspective, but also just from a level setting your sanity perspective. This is a problem as well. And so we've kind of come to this gap. And one of the things that makes America great is that whenever there is a gap like this, Americans have stepped forward and have been coders in various different kinds of ways in an effort to make their government better. And so Code for America said, we think right now is one of those moments, and Americans need to step forward and help make their government better. So following in the heels of esteemed people like this, let's begin to code. And so we began to look around and try to figure out what are some models that are out there that we might be able to use. And one of the great models is Teach for America. It's a fantastic organization. So for those who aren't familiar with Teach for America, just a very quick highlight, kind of the ostensible reason for Teach for America is to get people into schools to teach kids, especially in neighborhoods that don't tend to get or find it very, very hard to find teachers. So that's kind of level one of what their purpose is. There's a deeper purpose, though, which is to kind of get, especially young people, but young, smart, intelligent people of all ages, whatever, teaching, just caring about and thinking about teaching as a career. There's also a third kind of deeper reason that Teach for America exists and what they're trying to accomplish, which is to get people to care about this institution and try to think about how they can change the processes and culture and thinking of the school district itself. And if we can inject young, smart people in there, we may be able to kind of increase the speed of innovation that happens in that institution, regardless of whether Teach for America actually exists. And what I like about Teach for America is they're unbelievably clear about this in their intention. If you go to their website, they have these 3 goals written down, and they say, hey, yeah, we're going to try to do immediate impact, but we're going to get people who teach kind of learning about that system, and then we're going to do some long-term system change. That's the broader goal. And Code for America has kind of a similar type of objective. Right now we have 20 fellows, 3 of whom are in the room right now. I'm going to point them out in a little bit. And our goal is to get these people, we kind of get them together, and they come to us as kind of developer and technology evangelists and technologists. And our job, and especially my job as the head of the Institute for Code for America, is to change them into change agents. And we then deploy them into cities. And so this is the workspace in Boston, for example, where they actually work on site, learning about a specific project that the city is interested in having them work on. We have 4 amazing partner cities at this moment who have asked us to work on projects. Someone start to clap, because if they did, they should. These are great. These are great partners for us, so I want to thank them. So we have 4 cities that have chosen to partner with us. You'll notice that one of them is Washington, D.C., and we have a Code for America team. Do you guys want to stand up again? I know you guys already stood up once, but let's make you stand up again. Right on. And they're actually working with the wonderful Andrew on the Civic Commons project here on trying to bring that into reality. And, if we're working with these 4 cities, there is kind of a broader goal, though, because we don't want to just limit ourselves to 4 cities. So there's kind of 3 overarching concepts that are kind of at the heart of Code for America. The first is we want to be lightweight. Right? We want to have solutions that work quickly and you can implement quickly. So light as a feather. The second is we want it to be usable. We want it to look like the Apple Store and not the Florida ballot. So let's make it look nice, make it easy to use. And then the final one is we want it to be reusable. So it's great that these 4 cities have, decided to invest in us and us to invest in them, but we want the code to be reusable by other cities so that this technology and this innovation can spread across the United States. But I think our deeper goal is, much like Teach for America, we want to be a culture virus. The cities and the organizations that invite us in say, we know we're doing things one way, we want to do things differently, and we want you to help us learn how to do things differently. We want to achieve this, and we know we need your help to begin to learn on how we're going to do that. So if you kind of think about Code for America in that terms, we have actually kind of a similar goal. Teach for America, except for you just scratch out classrooms and you replace it with government. And our job is to try to think about what long-term change looks like, but with immediate impact. And so I want to kind of close with just a brief statement of kind of, well, what is it that you can do? How can you be part of this? And there's a couple different things. The first is, if you belong to an organization like this or a government agency, we are looking for partners. If you have an IT project that you think is interesting, that you want to roll out, that's going to be nimble and fast, and you think you could do with a little bit of culture virus, come talk to us. We are very, very eager to talk to you. Beyond that, though, it's not just the 20 fellows. Code for America only becomes real when there are Code for America agents in every single institution, in every single city, in every single community across this country. And we don't want the experience to be limited to just the 20 fellows. Every Friday in San Francisco, we hold a hack days where we invite anybody to come in. But we also want to be hosting events across the country, and we want people to feel part of this, and we want to provide them with the tools to take the software we create and others create, implement them in their cities and their governments, and do whatever they can to kind of spread innovation across this country. And the kind of the closing point here is, why should you care? Well, you never know where the next CIO and CTO is going to come from in the United States. Clay Johnson put me on this one. This is a C-SPAN video of Vivek sitting outside the Supreme Court before the decision that was the result of that Florida ballot, because he wanted to see the Supreme Court decision. Here's a person who just cared about government long before he being part of the administration. And we have 20 fellows who care a ton about government. And I don't know if next one is going to be the CIO, but they all care. They want to be part of it. They want to help you. They want your help. They want to learn. So we might be kind of planting these types of seeds, and we hope that you'll help us. So that's Code for America. Thank you guys so much.
Yay.
Sure.
David, thank you. Speaking personally, that was totally awe-inspiring, and I could say that at State Department could use a little culture virus, so I'll be giving you a call. Does anybody, let's take a couple of questions for David, if there are some in the audience. Or / no, yeah.
Has Code for America thought about how it's going to scale to the federal government?
Yeah, I think at the moment we have 4 partner cities, but we're open to all levels of government and really kind of thinking about how we can engage with different types of organizations. So we're about government, we're not about just city government.
Okay, just city now.
Thank you.
One more question for the David. Yeah.
Is there a requirement that the code code produced is open source?
Right now, we're using the word that it can be reused. I think the goal is to actually assign everything an open source license, but there are going to be times, I think, when we're working with some city partners where we may be working on their platforms, where we're going to have to be kind of really think hard about the type of license we can use because we're working on their technology.
David, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, can I call up the folks on the next panel, and I will start introducing you. We're going to talk about open source, what not to fear, or Zen and the art of open source. So my amazing buddy, Alex Howard, that everybody knows from O'Reilly Media, will be moderating this session. He'll be joined by Dr. Lynn Wells, Director of Center for Technology and National Security Policy at NDU, Deb Bryant, Public Sector Communities Manager at OSU Open Source Lab, and Greg Elin, Chief Data Architect at the FCC. Thanks.
Okay, well, I think you'll turn on in a second. We're good to go. So thank you so much. It's sort of remarkable to me that we're all sitting here in the State Department at this historic moment in, of all places, the war room, when we're seeing another country go through its own revolution. There's something to be said in the way that open source plays a role in that, in the sense that we've been seeing information move across networks in unprecedented ways, often in an open source manner. And I think we'll hear Dr. Wells talk about that a little bit later in terms of the situational awareness that people now have the ability to receive just by tuning into the internet, if and where it's not blocked, of course. And on that count, I'm glad to hear that wiki still isn't a bad word here at the State Department. There's clearly a connection between open source and open government in the way that people have described the evolution of it here this morning. What's particularly interesting in the intersection of technology, citizens, and government to me is the model itself, whereby you can see a reciprocal relationship between technology-enabled citizens, civic developers, people releasing data, and the government themselves. I think the challenge that Gunnar laid out pretty well is that, by and large, that relationship where code that is used is not donated back. That's why it's significant the White House chose to do that. And as we see different parts of the government move forward using open source, whether it's energy.gov or house.gov, whether it's the different states and localities adopting these code bases, the willingness to which they're able to do that is going to set a precedent for the rest of the world because they are watching this. They are very interested to see what's happening here. I have no doubt that there are many people watching online now too. And those standards are not a small thing. If you look at the Direct project, and if you go to David Riley's session later on, I think you'll find something that's important there. Now, if you want to talk about it in a more sexy way, you can call it the health internet, right? It's a way of moving information securely across the net. Now, that's an incredibly important innovation. It came out of an open source relationship. It came out of a collaboration between government, came between a collaboration between the federal and the state level. That's something that you'll be able to see be relevant any place where there's a mandate from federal government to work with the states. Something to look to very carefully, and I'm glad we can be here and talk about it together. Then the other thing I just to mention is that when I talked to Chris Kemp at NASA, he's the CTO for IT there, when he was working out west, that part of NASA there is next to the valley, trying to soak up some of that creative energy, came up with this NASA Nebula cloud computing environment. And they chose to open source it, and then they chose to release it to industry. And if you're tracking the story, it's important. It's now been adopted by Rackspace, one of the biggest cloud hosting companies. It's now been backed up by Cisco. And it's a viable platform for people to install to actually offer cloud computing. And that's essentially this change in the way we think about computing, the way we can move it away from being just located locally elsewhere. And it's creating economic value in a way that many open government programs frankly haven't yet. So with that, that's the good stuff, right? Let's get on to some of the fear and loathing bit, because we know that there are a lot of barriers that people think about in terms of open source, whether it's security, whether it's procurement, whether it's a code sharing issue, whether it's support, you name it. I'm happy to hand it over to Deb Bryant, who's been teaching me about a lot of those challenges for some time. She's been through the gamut in the private and public sector, and now she's out at Oregon State. And please, Deb, can you talk more about that count?
Sure, thank you. I got the fear and loathing introduction, so that's really a fun way to start. I'm going to take 2 minutes to tell you where I'm from so you have the context. Because Oregon State University's Open Source Lab is home to most of the major open source community projects. The Linux Foundation and the Linux kernel development lives in our data center. The Apache Foundation infrastructure is in our center. The Drupal project is in our data center. So we have a very unique perspective on how open source communities work and how that software is being developed. I joined the OSL about 5 years ago. I was formerly the Deputy State CEO for the state of Oregon, and I did enough time there to garner a great appreciation for what it takes to move technology projects in the private sector, excuse me, the public sector. Before that, is the private sector and startups. So what we've done is we took what we learned about open source. We started paying attention to what especially state and local government were doing. And as it turned out, they were very early adopters of open source. Now, I was asked if I could do a bit on what the common misconceptions are for open source. I think that's been pretty well covered. Certainly there have been a number of comments made about freeness. You know, I would have to say that the government IT leadership is urbane enough to understand that there's no such thing as a free lunch, that people understand what the total cost of ownership is. So I will take 2 minutes instead to list out the common misconceptions for proprietary software. Common misconception one is that you will always have support when you need it, at the moment you need it. The second one would be, if you report a bug, it will always be fixed at the moment you need it fixed. The third misconception would be that company will always be in business and always be there, and they will never change their business model, and they will always support that product that you've just invested your personal career because you sat in front of the legislature and begged for money, and now it's gone. And I think the last misconception would be that the person who wrote that code under your contract will always be working for that company and will be available with great documentation to tell you what's wrong with your system. So really the problems that we talk about in terms of issues with open source and issues with proprietary software, they're really the same thing. You can really think about open source as being a different way of approaching sourcing. And the OSL, we always say the right tool for the job. We have to think, though, that open source presents an extraordinary opportunity in the government space, particularly, I'm going to talk for just a minute about state and local, because the federal government has a large budget that they can save money from, but local governments have very small budgets, and they have capabilities they can't achieve. So by example of models, I'm going to share a few projects with you, and those things should help you remediate some of your fear loathing. In the southeast of the U.S., there are over 500 agencies that are using an open source database to share law enforcement information, public safety information. It's called the LEADER Project. It was done by the states of Tennessee and South Carolina. They got a $50,000 grant from the Department of Homeland Security. They pooled their first responder dollars, and they did an open source project. And they share that with agencies. It's great. Small counties, jails, police, sheriff's office would not have this ability to share information if it weren't for that project. There's also the single largest provider of systems that run prisons, state prisons, is actually open source. There are 6 states that run a full version of the NCOMS, the National Correction Offender Management System, that is open source. And there's actually no other vendor that has that much of a market penetration. They started that project 10 years ago. The model to be able to develop software collaboratively has been important, and they've been able to do it successfully. And I think you'll see Civic Commons and Code for America build on that kind of idea. And then finally, I wanted to mention that in the context, because we are here at the State Department and we're talking about international issues, I've been very fortunate the last several years to consult with foreign governments on open source and to take some of the projects we've done here in the U.S. abroad to talk to them about that model for development. Spain has a foundation, the Fanatic Foundation. We just completed a study of public administration code development because they want to see if they can use that model in their country. But an important component is the partnership with the vendor community because there's always someone there to work on it. Malaysia has an open source competency center. They have a 90% adoption rate in their agencies. There's the European Union. Brazil's been doing open source development for some time. Countries make different decisions about why they do this approach. Sometimes it's an economic development situation. But in general, open source is into the mainstream. And I think we're past a lot of older conversations about things that we don't really fear and loathe as much as people might think.
Thank you, Deb. And in that context, I'd move over to Greg Elin, who has worked in the Sunlight Labs and now is at actually a new position, working as the Chief Data Officer at the FCC, which certainly has no shortage of data, and is bringing an open source mentality to releasing it. So can you speak to that, Greg?
Sure. Thank you very much. I was a little bummed that it was great to see so much conversation in the beginning about open data. I thought that this was really just about open source, so I didn't really prepare much to say about open data, but I think that they do go hand in hand, and since the gateway was opened, I will say that that's something that we're very involved in and very interested in. We have scc.gov/developer. We're focused a lot on creating APIs, and I think that the ability to share data, my job as a data officer, is making data as an asset available for daily use. And through APIs, through other techniques, just make it really easy for someone to go get the data that they need to pursue a project and to explore with something. I kind of want to echo what Deb was saying about the misconceptions. We live in an environment, we live in an environment of a kind of candy store of licenses these days. We have proprietary licenses, shared source licenses, open source, free licenses, Creative Commons licenses for things that aren't even software. They come with different terms. And we also have hosted services. So what is the license of a hosted service and what is the implication of that? So this is a richness that demonstrates there's an ecology of different types of licensing and arrangements between parties that give us more flexibility than we've had before. So I really don't think it's about open source versus proprietary. It's accepting the reality that people are sharing all sorts of assets in different ways, and that's going to get richer as we go further, as people start to have terms of service and related to, and SLAs and related to sharing data and information and APIs. So it's kind of like we have to embrace this, and it's no longer can we do it or can't we. The market has a rich ecosystem. I guess, is it really the case that people are having, let me rephrase. Open source is a non-issue inside of the FCC anymore. I haven't run into a roadblock about that we can't use it. I haven't run into it at all. There's always some stuff about figuring out a terms of service or figuring out a license that has to do with any type of package. Are people really having a problem that where they work in government is saying we cannot use open source? Are people really having that problem? Yes? Is the pushback that you get along the lines that have been discussed so far, we're not sure about security, we're not sure about support, or is it something else? But it comes down to those things. Well, all right, so I'm going to try to focus on some examples because I'm a developer and I work on this and try to get into it. But I have found, here are the things that I need support for. The biggest thing that I need support for and that I see people inside of an enterprise using support is a security patch for the software. Number one thing, security patch. There's a problem. There has to be a core update to the code. I see security patches happening pretty much at the same pace in the open source community and in the proprietary software community. I don't see a difference there with how fast that happens. Looking something up online that I don't know how to do. I don't know how. I think the biggest support. I don't know how to do X. I have to go look up how to do it. I find that that's very common. And again, I would say that the ability to get support varies across different projects, whether it's proprietary or open source. Mission critical open source applications, that kind of lookup is really easy. Something is broken. I am trying to do something with the software and I can't do it because something appears to be broken. The documentation isn't working. I tried it. Something is broken. I see zero difference between proprietary and open source software at that level. Zero difference. If there's something, and we have seen several experiences lately at the FCC, we had something broken in LifeRay, which is an open source tool that's actually by Sun, which is now owned by Oracle. What was broken was spread across between the operating system and the code itself. It took us a long time to figure out what it was, and it took us an even longer time to get it fixed. And I think that we had purchased the license for that open source tool. So we had there's a big project that we're working on where we had the opportunity to test out three different commercial software plus open source software in the environment. The three commercial softwares choked on the scale of data that we were using. And the vendors all said, nope, we can't do that, can't do it at that scale. And we were able to solve the problem by writing Python code, leveraging a piece of open source and commercial software at the same time. But the vendor could not solve the problem. And I think the big thing that I found also is that quality support for any type of product, be it open source or commercial, comes from stability. And so what you will see is that the vendor basically can't modify the code base to fix your bug because it will mess up their stable support. It's essentially, if you modify that, you will void the warranty. But my experience is that every piece of software gets modified because it operates in an integrated environment. So everybody is always modifying their software, open source or otherwise. What I have seen is, so integration undermines support. You know, we can't do that because you hooked it up with this other thing or you're running on that, or it's not our fault, it's the operating system's fault, it's the other piece of software that's the fault, et cetera. My experience is that most mission critical, if not all mission critical open source tools, you can buy support for. You can buy support for Drupal, you can buy support for Linux, you can buy support for Apache, WordPress, MySQL. So anything that's mission critical, you can buy support for. I've never seen the government agency choke a neck of I don't know how someone chokes Oracle, how a small agency like the FCC goes around and chokes Oracle or Microsoft or other people because they have a bug that they're not going to fix. I'm really suspicious about that. I think that there is an aspect of open source that is fundamentally free compared to commercial, and that is procurement and prototyping. You can prototype for free with open source. Inside the enterprise, you cannot prototype reliably with commercial software because You don't know how long you're going to have that license for. You don't know what's going to happen, but you can prototype for free with open source, and that's a huge advantage. I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to jump to some examples, if that might be happening. So we have Access, Microsoft Access, commercial piece of software. Every Microsoft Access database I know has a custom interface on top of it built by somebody inside of the enterprise. So the notion that there's someplace I can go for support on that Access database other than the contractor that I hired or the intern who built that or something, there's nowhere I can go for that. So at the small level, it is custom already as soon as I try to use Microsoft Access. We had at more kind of a medium level, we have released something called issuemap.org, open source, cloud-based, developed with Fortius One, and it's basically you can copy and paste information from a spreadsheet and create a map in about 30 seconds. We developed it as open source. It's really kind of useful, a time-saving tool that we could give back. It's on top of all sorts of well-established tool sets. Made it really easy. So we had another project. In fact, Ben Balter, who's over there in the corner, came to us as an intern at the FCC and kind of convinced me if I have the internet, an intern, and a thumb drive and open source, I can kind of do just about anything. What? And duct tape, right. So the quick story that I want to try to tell here is that I got really tired looking at spreadsheets of URLs that people were using to categorize different parts of our website. So we were trying to catalog our website. We're working on fixing it up, and everyone's passing around a spreadsheet. So you get the spreadsheet. You want to go see the page. You got to copy and paste the URL, et cetera, et cetera. So I said to Ben I wanted to figure out something else to do, and I was imagining that we could kind of have a proxy where I pull off the web page and maybe kind of insert something on top of it. I'm going to try to articulate this better, but the nutshell is Ben whipped out a thumb drive that had map on it. Map or, sorry? XAMPP. So XAMPP is a portable app. It runs off of a thumb drive that has an Apache web server, PHP, XAMMP, Apache, MySQL, PHP, and what? And also, right. So it runs off of a thumb drive. So the significance was here is, central IT doesn't want to install certain pieces of software, doesn't want to give an intern administrative rights to the computer, but basically we had an entire development environment running off of a thumb drive, which was essentially secure relative to the agency because we weren't installing anything on the computer. But we had PHP, we had XAMPP, and what we were able to do is we were able to get the open source PHP proxy. PHP proxy would go fetch our web page after it was rendered. We would then modify that page to stick in some code so that we could tap a database and apply to the page metrics about the page. Like we could suddenly show on the web page delicious tags. And we even created a form so that we could capture information from end users. So if an end user wanted to record information about a web page, how it was categorized, did it need to be updated, we did this through this tool that we built without having to talk to IT at all, and without having to modify a single piece of server. And we are able to do that through open source software and our own type of code. I'm probably running long. Yes? Okay. So I will, but I'll give I mentioned the large project that we had 3 commercial pieces of software fail, and we had to write an integration to solve the data problem we had. And I think the other thing is that we started work on the national broadband map, which has been a partnership between, which was funded with, that NTIA started and FCC has been involved with. That prototype of it was built with a variety of tools and open source and RESTful APIs, and that has been very informative in terms of what is being built. for that. But the ability to prototype very rapidly and without procurement delays is significant with open source.
And surprised you didn't mention that FCC.gov is going to be moving to Drupal itself, too. Right?
Yes, and FCC.gov is going to be moving to Drupal itself soon, and we are building an API into that.
All right, and that might be sometime perhaps next month?
It might be sometime perhaps next month.
Okay. Yeah, well, so with that, I'd move over to Dr. Linton Wells. I first started reading his work some time ago. When it really came into my sphere of influence was when I saw him writing about the use of social media and the Defense Department and the need for better situational awareness. And open source intelligence is an increasingly important concept here, I would think, in the context of getting much better sense of what's happening in different countries before it actually happens. In terms of crises, there may be no better way to get information at times. And with that context, I'll move it over to Dr. Wells.
Thank you. So what I'd like to talk about a little bit is crowdsourcing and the use of social media, as Alex said. Some of you who are steeped in the crisis mapping community have already heard what I'm going to start with, but basically in Haiti, roughly 10 days after the disaster, the Coast Guard was getting operationally useful data from a 24/7 voluntary ops center manned by students at Fletcher School in Boston using Ushahidi, a situational awareness tool developed for election violence monitoring in East Africa, based on data drawn from the slums of Port-au-Prince by SMS texting and Skype, translated from the Creole by the Haitian diaspora worldwide, overlaid on images being processed at San Diego State, and coordinated through OpenStreetMap. Nice job. Yeah. 10 days after the disaster. Anyway, so it's an example of what can be done. So we then took a look at this and said, how generalizable is this? And from this came a model that's notionally begins with a crowd, which is going to generate information whether the government wants it or not, and a bridge. So an organization has to build a bridge to that crowd. And what U.S. Southern Command did in the case of Haiti was they designated an open technology cell. They used a network called APAN, which we have a whole different set of issues with. The point is they used network. They built some filters, and they set up a channel to carry this information to the decision makers. So crowd and bridge. But I was down in Miami a few months later, and the NGO community really beat me up and said, look, unless you get a completed transaction out of this, unless people are pulled from the rubble or medical supplies are delivered or contracts are fulfilled, it's just you techie guys patting yourselves in the back for exchanging electrons. So there has to be a transaction part. And finally, there has to be a feedback piece so that you can understand how well you're doing with the transaction, but also you can feed back to the crowd and tell the story you want to tell, or perhaps even shame the international community into how miserably they're doing in some cases where things aren't going well. So the generic model here is crowd, bridge, transaction, feedback. So we took a look at could this be applied in other situations. Did a paper called From Haiti to Helmand. And it turns out it applies in other situations. But we've also been able to learn a lot from what's happening in Afghanistan and Colombia and other places. And there's a colleague here today, Todd Huffman, who has developed a set of rules for information sharing. And one of the basic rules is you better give it back better than you got it. And we govies have a habit of taking the information and slapping an FOUO or higher classification label on it, and thereby engendering an undying enmity from the people who gave it to us. So Todd's point was trying to fold in is how do you give something back better than you got it in a map and geospatially referenced and whatever. The other thing we do is quarterly experiments. I'm from the National Defense University in a little center called the Center for Technology and National Security Policy. And we do quarterly field experiments out of Camp Roberts in California, largely based around geospatial information. And one of the things that happened is people get all nervous about, gee, if you're doing open source, you're doing software development in a government experiment, how can people use it on the outside? And the answer is all the things we do is open source. And so if somebody wants to put value-added products on top of it, fine. Go put value-added products like Red Hat does with Linux. Everything that comes out of our experiments is open source, and that seems to have satisfied the legal community. The paper that Alex mentioned, Social Software and National Security, with Mark Drapeau about 15 months ago, basically said, we may not be comfortable, we govies may not be comfortable with this kind of stuff, but you can't ignore it. If you can organize million-person marches or million-person demonstrations against the FARC in Colombia on Facebook, if you can do what was done in Mumbai on Twitter, we've seen what's happened in Tunisia and Egypt, the govies, if you're going to ignore it, you're going to become more and more irrelevant, because that's where the action is happening. So there's a British journalist by the name of Nick Gowing, who was kind of like a Walter Cronkite of BBC. And he's written a book called Sky Full of Lies and Black Swans. So Sky Full of Lies is the term the Iranians used for the social media commentary on what was going on in Iran after the election. So Sky Full of Lies, dismiss it. Black Swan, of course, unintended events. The point that Gowing makes is that none of our organizations, not business, not government, not military, are set up to handle the velocity of information that's going to be generated by the open source social software crowdsourced movements today. And we've obviously seen examples from BP in the Gulf through, again, governments in Tunisia to where else. So he's actually working actively with our European command and our central command, and the commanders, General Mattis and Admiral Stavridis, have actually said we need to find a way to change behavior in our organization. I'm not interested in having an outside journalist come in and talk to us. I'm not interested in having fuzzy academics talk about it. I want to change behavior so next year we do something different rather than getting the lesson observed, and next year lesson reobserved, and next year lesson reobserved, the way we all do it now. So you've got a couple of people who are seriously looking at it. So then to wrap up, is this a danger-free zone? No, of course it's not. Opponents will find ways to use this information against us. That doesn't mean quit. It's up to us to outlearn, to outthink, to out-innovate them. That's one of the things our country is built on. As my colleague John Scott has mentioned, software is an element of national power. Go out there and use it, take advantage of it, and I'm really, really glad to be here with you because this is a great opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, so, let's move to questions. And one thing I definitely want to do to sort of build on the great comments you guys have all shared, and thank you so much, is give a shout out to all the folks who are following on the live stream. My mistake for not recognizing you guys earlier. We definitely want to take the questions, and I know they've been streaming in. So just raise your hands in the back if there are any. And in the meantime, perhaps we can start with questions for the panel.
Sure. Well, I took the opportunity to ask for questions online before I came here, too, using Google Moderator, which I think is, in fact, open source. And the one that rose to the top, let that crowd vote things up, was, are there standards in place for open source developers pitching their code to federal customers? If so, how will these standards be enforced? Microphone.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I would have to say at this moment the answer is not really, that there are not standards that are in place. I would say that the bigger issue is that most people that are working on open source and the open source community does not have the apparatus that interfaces with the procurement apparatus that government has to have. In other words, what's generically referred to as the FAR. So I think that, a great developer can't just go easily work for government or contribute something. So I think that we are, and I guess when we say pitching code, that means different things in an open source environment. In one open source environment means, well, I just got a bug fix, or I've added a plugin, or I've done something like that, and I want to make it available. And as government version controls are spun up, or government puts more projects on SourceForge or on GitHub, as we're starting to explore how to do, then we will just use those mechanisms to accept code into the database. I'm not sure that there are across the government standards in general about pitching code, period. I think that there's approaches to pitching product, And there's some requirements about, it has to be accessible, it has to meet certain security standards. I think it would be great to begin to have that, and I think it will happen. But
so just to reinforce that, and I'm a couple of years out of date, but we, in terms of product and DoD, we quite often got versions of things like Linux security certified for use in certain applications. So there clearly was a methodology for taking a product and having someone look at it and see if it met a set of criteria, whether that translates to generic code. Frankly, the biggest concern we had was that through some of the open source licenses, somebody would take some of the open source product, put it into some other code, and thereby make the entire code open source. There was a lot of concern that we didn't understand the releasability of the open source licenses, but we certainly could get security on product.
Most of that certification was usually done in-house, in government house, as opposed to third party. So I think, I'm not sure about open source for America, but I think that there's an opportunity there of qualifying things, and that would be very helpful.
Can we take a question from the Twitter feed?
Hey. So the question came from James Losey. It actually came about an hour ago, but I think it's very relevant here. How can government elevate open source as a foundation for innovation, as a long-term investment in American technology?
Well, I think by rewarding the use of it. I mean, it seems to me that there's some of the work that's been done in the challenge grants, some of the work that's been done in just showing off product that's come from open sources and showing that there's value in it as a way to turn around the appreciation. I don't quite honestly know what the business model is to make a profit on it, but it seems to me the government certainly can, as in the crowdsourcing, there are a lot of different parts of the Defense Department now that are trying to take advantage of Sahana and Ushahidi and the various things that have been developed out of Haiti and out of Afghanistan to turn this into something that we'd encourage others to get involved in.
I would also respond to that by saying for most citizens it needs to work. That's why when people talk about having a phone, an iPhone's great, they'll switch to Android, which is open source, if it works for them. That's always the thing that comes back to most citizens. It's great to see that the Direct project provides that opportunity. If it gets you out of the doctor's office more quickly, it means you don't have to come back, then that makes a difference. If it saves government $35 million every time it's implemented, I think you'll find bipartisan support for that, right? That's something that's consistent. The nuts and bolts, the tech of it, isn't as important as the outcome. And for the support side, that's very important.
I would just add that historically, the government has set standards just by the way it consumes software as a general statement. So the best way for government to contribute is to find the appropriate ways to use open source. And the other piece is to work hard, as some agencies are already doing. I think we have someone here from SPAWAR, Heather Burke will be speaking this afternoon, about how government agencies are contributing code back to open source projects, because that's going to strengthen the entire ecosystem.
Okay. Got a question back there?
I'd like to follow up a little bit on the issues on open source. Hello, Greg. Hello, Lynn. Hello, Deb. One of the big problems that we've run across with the FAR is that it seems to be optimized to ensure relatively fair competition. It is not optimized to bring around collaboration, particularly between commercial and nonprofit entities. What would need to change in order to take the mashup culture that we currently have outside of government and bring that strength and that capability inside government?
I think one thing that would need to change is for the open source community to kind of climb the mountain. And I think that there is movement from, everyone in this room is interested in this topic, so there are now people throughout government that are incredibly interested in actively using open source. doing different types of collaboration, tuned into social media. So it's there. So I think that the parties that are, but we're working as hard as we can inside to do what we can. And it's really would be very helpful for the developers and other people to go say, to figure out what the FAR is and to create the apparatuses to meet us halfway, and to figure out how to do it. Because I think that there's the generic, what I always loved about the internet was that kind of, I don't know if people have heard of the hourglass architecture, of which you've got your future up here and you've got your legacy systems down here and some type of standardized interface in between, like IP packets or whatnot. And the reality is that government and the FAR are going to have for some time legacy mechanisms that they have to deal with. So we need the innovators to figure out how to interface with that and then change it. I think the internet took off because somebody was willing to figure out how to do PPP, where they could do machine-to-machine communication, digital communication over analog phone lines. And so it's the same. So I think that would be very helpful.
Got a question over here?
I was just wondering, obviously with open source, the philosophy is that everyone can have a seat at the table, anyone can kind of roll up their sleeves and hop on board and contribute in any way. But Mr. Wells, with what you learned as far as the Haitian example that you gave, there's probably no explicit protocol, but how can you make sure in the case of a natural disaster where you need swift response, and you're going to do it in an open source manner, that you're targeting as many relevant stakeholders as possible? Because you mentioned some providers in that whole setup that had conduits between students at Fletcher and images coming from certain slum areas, and a lot of it providers that we may have not thought of initially as off the bat as being relevant to a cause like that. So in your experience from that example, or any number of examples, maybe even out of Afghanistan, is there a way for open source solutions to natural crises to kind of make sure that we have the right players, or not the right, but like certain players at the table to make sure that they're contributing?
So one of the points is that the wrong time to exchange business cards is after the disaster. And so you need, I'm not being serious, you really need to have a warm production base, if you will, that you try to engage ahead of time to try to get the social networks and the trust relationships built on an ongoing basis. That's one of the things that's come out of John Crowley's work at Camp Roberts. We've been able to get some of that. But it's a model that I haven't yet figured out how to crack, is the question of how to sustain this warm production base. I mean, if it's open source, I mean, the government, in fact, one of the challenges we've put to some of our government compatriots here is how much are you willing to invest with whom when, in order to make sure that when the disaster happens consistently, there are people who are willing to stand up and man the 24/7 op center, and that the common current version of Ushahidi or whatever is going to be used is available and distributed and so on and so forth. A lot of this thus far is ad hoc. And so we're trying to work out ways to make it less ad hoc, largely by working with an increasing circle of people, so we've got touch points in as many different types of situations as you can. The other point that's really important to recognize is in the first 6 or so weeks after Haiti, there was an incredible outpouring of innovation, enthusiasm, and regrettably that has not been sustained. At least and so you can go and find hospitals now where they're 2 miles away from each other and they don't know what their status of medical supplies is and needs and things like that. So I think the 3 issues are get engaged early. We need to work with the government to find a sustaining model of, and frankly, maybe the private sector is the right answer for this rather than the government. If you can find a foundation that would be willing to fund some of this, or a Walmart, or somebody who's got a commercial supply chain that's engaged that would want to tap into the added talents of the open source community, some kind of sustaining model is there. We're still working on it. Okay?
There is a new initiative called Crisis Commons that's trying to solve that problem. They were funded by the Sloan Foundation. They're operating out of the Woodrow Wilson Center, so you can say it's an experiment, a new concept, but that is the exact problem they're trying to solve, is how do you sustain that warm organization over time? How do you convene some of that technology and will be, the Open Source Lab is actually going to host our infrastructure, so I'm particularly fresh in my mind.
And it's worth noting, too, with respect to Crisis Commons, they've made a conscious choice that if they develop applications, they're going to be open source.
Yes.
And that was something in the DNA of the organization that caused some discussion when you talk to people in disaster management or emergency response. They need to use things that are trustworthy, that they have experience with before the issue occurs, and that are adaptable and tough. Open source is often those things, but not always. So there's some challenges there.
That's right. And I want to add to that because there are a number of organizations here, the Sahana Foundation in particular, that's doing crisis management software. So Crisis Commons is convening these kinds of organizations, NGOs, and working with the people like Red Cross that are actually delivering the services.
So we have time for one more?
So let's go with these two questions as the last ones, and then we'll close it up.
So I wanted to address, Mr. Wells, I think it was your concern that the DoD had, that they were frightened that by using open source software in other products, it might cause the source code for those other things to be released, right? I actually have done enforcement of open source licenses as part of my work, and I want to reassure other government agencies in the room and also the DoD that simply cannot happen. The worst that we can ever do to anyone using the software and violating the license is say, please stop using the software in that way. There is no power on earth or in the courts or anywhere can force anyone to release code that they don't want to release. What can happen, and the reason that people can sometimes confuse the two, is that people may say, oh, if I release code, can I keep using your software? And the answer to that is yes, but no one is ever forced to release code. So there should never be any fear, and I've seen this fear in many other commercial companies too. There is this fear that if you use open source code, it may somehow infect your code base and force you to release code. But there's actually nothing that can force you to do that.
This is actually a very useful point because that point was not clear to me, and I'm not a lawyer, so I hadn't been through all the laws about it.
Yeah.
But people did come up and say, you have to be careful, or what you wrote in Oracle will now have to be released because.
No, the worst that we can do to you is say, stop doing that. we can't make you release Oracle's code. So anyway, I just wanted to make that point.
Thank you.
Quick question. As someone who's been involved with the Crisis Common efforts here in the district, it's a little frustrating when I know that maybe the military has some collective intelligence or other government agencies, and we're messing around with almost social media 1.0, and if we could get that other component together, data that you guys may have when we're working on Crisis Camp Haiti or something like that, it would make it move much faster. Has there ever been any dialogue about maybe collective intelligence being brought into the social media crisis response?
That's a great question to ask Heather Blanchard, who's going to be here this afternoon actually doing a session on Crisis Commons. I know there's been some dialogue, but I want to speak for the project.
And I can say that we are starting to see examples in other countries too. It's important to look beyond what we're doing here. One of them is that Esri, geospatial mapping firm, which is decidedly not open source, has been partnered with Ushahidi and then is pulling in structured social data and OpenStreetMap into its situational awareness package, which it was used in the Australian floods. So the question is how much they're putting back into the system. And I think that's going to be one of the challenges. I mean, we've certainly heard from, again, referring back to Gunnar's discussion, right, that we had lots of hands in terms of people who are using it, but very few in terms of giving back. And I think that's clearly the place to grow.
Listen, please join me in thanking Alex, Deb, Lynn, and Greg and closing us out today. I think thanks to them, we no longer have fear and loathing about open source. So thank you.